I can tell you with certainty that most of you who are reading this had an imaginary friend at one point. A friend you made up because you needed someone, or something, to play with, or to simply kill everyday boredom. These friends vary from person to person. Most people who had imaginary friends described them as human-like figures with characteristics that describe their own personalities. However, no matter how hard you try, making anyone else believe that your imaginary friend is real is nearly impossible. No one, except you, truly believes in your imaginary friends. When I was maybe 5 or 6, I started kindergarten. Not many of the other kids there would talk to me, and I wouldn't start a conversation due to my shy nature. I went through kindergarten with no friends, and not enjoying anything about my upcoming years of education. It wasn't until the beginning of first grade that I met Nick. Nick was the first person to talk to me, later explaining that his imaginary friend, Eric, wanted us to meet each other. As Nick and I became better friends, he would talk to me about Eric, translating his words and emotions so that we could have one-on-one conversations with each other. As a kid, I thought talking to Eric was like a game, and the rules were made up by Nick. After a couple weeks, I became more attuned to Eric's personality. Nick would no longer have to translate what he'd say, and it became more like talking to a real person. When second grade came, Nick had to leave. Because of his absence, I no longer had any friends. So I figured I'd make an imaginary friend, like Eric. Soon, I created Greg, my new best friend. My parents soon became aware of Greg, seeing him as just a silly game that I'd grow out of. Before long, I had a bond with Greg, almost like Nick and Eric. However, Greg was more like me. Every day I would go outside with Greg, and we'd run around the yard and do childhood shit, like throw rocks into the pond or exploring the woods. As I went further into life, like around 4th grade, I soon made real friends. My interactions with Greg became less frequent. When I was with my friends, I imagined Greg was sad and alone, but I still didn't talk to him. By middle school, my thoughts of Greg were completely erased. All the time I spent was either by myself or with my friends, doing the things that Greg and I used to do. In the winter, when I was in 7th grade, I was sledding and throwing snowballs with my friends. This part I remember well. We were at a large hill, trying to see who could go the fastest, and bragging about how good we were at sledding. It was one of the moments that you'd never forget. All of us were having fun until I saw him. Greg. He was standing at the bottom of the hill, shivering in the cold, looking at me with sad eyes. I blinked multiple times, trying to clear the images of him from my mind, as I was shocked to see him again. He wouldn't leave, he just stood there, his expression turning angrier the longer I stared at him. I followed his gaze as he stared at my friends with pure hatred in his eyes. I looked back to him, and then he slowly vanished. Although I never saw him for the rest of the 7th grade, I never stopped thinking about that day. His face was imprinted in my mind, almost haunting me. I decided I could get rid of my remorse by completely cutting myself off from Greg. I destroyed the pictures and things I had written about him. The only thing I couldn't destroy was my memories of him. I thought about Greg less and just went on with my life. In my freshman year of high school, I started to see Greg again. However, he was no longer the image I had of him as a child. His face was sunken and there was no more emotion in his eyes. I started seeing him sitting down in my classroom and at my lunch table. The one strange thing was no one would sit where he was or walk where he walked. It was almost like he was a real person. He showed up wherever I was, and all he'd do is follow me. It wasn't too noticeable, but it was obvious that he was still there. The more we saw each other, the more I saw he changed his expression. He became angrier and started showing up in unexpected places. He was scaring me to the point that I couldn't sleep, and when I did, he would be there, watching me. He began to show up more and more often, and in more places. I started sleeping less and doing worse in school, and I drifted away from my friends. My parents tried to figure out what was happening to me, but they couldn't. They started counseling appointments later on, and visits from doctors, all of whom couldn't figure out what was the matter. I was declared insane and taken to a mental hospital where Greg would stare at me for hours, driving me more and more insane. I became very anxious, seeing images of Greg threatening to kill me. I started to talk to Greg, asking, "Why are you doing this? What's making you so angry?" But he never responded. Then, finally, he started to repeat 4 words. "Please don't leave me." Each time he said it, he got louder until he was screaming it, his face contorting into a deep, evil smile. This is my last day, as I finish typing this. I'm going to end my torment and get rid of Greg forever. My advice to you is never forget your imaginary friends.